All right, in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to session 2 of the Homelessness Prevention and Diversion Training Series. This is an interagency collaboration between Partners in Care, the Governor's Coordinator on Homelessness, the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, and the Mediation Center of the Pacific. Today's session is Subsidized Housing and Rental Assistance, Keeping Vulnerable People Housed. My name is Emma Grahusky. I'm with the Office of the Governor's Coordinator on Homelessness, and I'll be your host for today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items. The session will be recorded and the materials will be made available to attendees. If you're on the PIC listserv, that means we have your contact information and you'll be getting that link. And if you're not on that mailing list and you received this meeting invite from someone else, please share your email in the chat so we can be sure that you receive these materials. Everybody should be muted by default, so please use the chat feature if possible to type in your questions. We have some time for Q&A. And again, as a disclaimer, all the content shared in today's webinar is for general information purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. Anyone who's facing eviction or loss of housing should seek legal advice for their specific situation. And many of you are here because your agencies are already engaged in some of this work, but for those of you who aren't, I'd like to give you some background on why the topics that we'll be discussing today are so relevant. We have across our state over 5,600 households that receive public housing assistance. We have over 12,500 households receiving housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8, or something very similar to that. And we'll be adding over 700 more as the emergency housing voucher program continues to ramp up. Over 19,000 households have been approved for temporary COVID-19 rent and utility relief across the state, and over 190,000 households meet the definition of asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So what all of these households have in common is that their economic situation, whether it's temporary due to the pandemic or something that's more sustained, may put them more at risk of homelessness if something goes wrong. They may rely on a housing voucher to be able to afford their rent. They may be living in a subsidized housing unit, or they may be living paycheck to paycheck with no safety net. Our focus today is on preventing vulnerable people who rely on these resources from falling into homelessness. Our goal is that participants will be able to recognize some of the common early signs of potential tenancy issues for people who receive housing subsidies, to identify steps that tenants and advocates can take to prevent the loss of housing or housing subsidy, to understand the scope of temporary rental and utility assistance that may be available, and to prepare recipients of time-limited subsidies for a transition back to self-sufficiency. So joining us today are our 4 panelists representing the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, the City and County of Honolulu's Section 8 program, the City and County of Honolulu's Rent and Utility Relief Program, administered by Catholic Charities Hawaii as one of the providers, and the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. I'd like to ask each of our 4 panelists to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Hawaii Public Housing Authority.
Hello, everyone. Hakeem Wansafi, Executive Director, Hawaii Public Housing Authority. Hope you're well.
Thanks. So go next to City and County Section 8 program.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jane Lee. I am with the City and County of Honolulu Section 8 program. I am the Rental Assistance Administrator.
Okay, thanks, Jane. And then Catholic Charities Hawaii.
Hi, everybody. Julian Okamoto, and I am a Division Administrator here, and I oversee the Housing Assistance and Referral Programs Division. Thank you.
And the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii.
Hi, I'm Dan O'Mara. I'm the Managing Attorney for Legal Aid's Housing Unit and also oversee our statewide Fair Housing Enforcement Group, too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. For this session, we're doing primarily a panel discussion to address some key topics that have come up really frequently over the past several months, especially after the ending of the eviction moratorium and some of the waivers that have been in place during the pandemic. We put together a few of these questions, and we'll have time for additional Q&A from participants. So to get us started with our panel discussion, let's start with a couple of questions for our panelists from our Section 8 Public Housing and Legal Aid Society. So we know that unpaid rent is, one of the most black and white reasons that someone could be evicted or terminated from a subsidy program. But other than unpaid rent, what are you folks seeing in terms of common scenarios that put tenants at risk of losing their housing subsidy, whether that's their public housing unit, their Section 8 unit, their rent supplement, or any of the above? And so let's start with Jane from the city.
Thank you. I have a list here, so I'll go through it really quickly. Unreported or underreported or delay in reporting income changes may result in a debt owed to the PHA, and then even with a payment plan, they fail to pay on their debt. Purposefully misleading the PHA or the landlord for a desired outcome. Not paying the utility part of their responsibilities. And then when the utility gets shut off, they lose their voucher because they're in violation of the family obligations. We've got guests coming and going, unauthorized household members, excuse me, moving out of the unit without proper notice. Getting involved with criminal activities. We do a criminal background check annually. Serious or repeated violations of the lease, which leads to eviction. Unable to gather the necessary paperwork on their own for eligibility. We annually re-examine their eligibility. Language, and we all know language is an issue. Because they don't follow through with maybe services offered. Some of them say, I understand, and they really end up not understanding. As far as for our program requirements, we will have and hire interpreters for any kind of program services that they need. Lack of comprehension. They may say they understand, but they really don't. A bad landlord can also ruin things for people. You just get in with somebody who's, just a bad person altogether. And then going into lack of support from case managers. When a case manager, and this is my words, when a case manager doesn't see the person, but just sees the job, okay? Damaging the property. And we've got, from the beginning of time, and I know Dan knows this, I keep on, venting with him, is we have a really big hoarding issue. Especially showed up when COVID started, because people are not going out, people are not, and the ones that are the population that we're seeing the most are elderly and of course disabled individual households. And so they are starting to lose their units because when the landlord gets in there, it's just, it's trashed. And then of course, the last but not least, the voucher expires and there's not available units for them to rent.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And Dana, I want to turn it over to you because I think you probably see many of the same issues, maybe from the perspective of tenants. And so is there anything that you wanted to add of some of the common scenarios that come up other than just unpaid rent for why people are at risk of losing their Section 8 subsidy or their public housing unit?
I think we see the same sorts of things that Jane has mentioned. And as a law firm, we're sometimes able to engage and try and address those issues. And a lot of that has, as she noted, some of them are disability-related issues and language-related issues. With the disability-related issues, that gets into the whole reasonable accommodation request component of it, which sometimes, not just often, it's able to address some of those issues for their subsidy through a reasonable accommodation request. And to add to what Jane had said, with also what we're seeing in the courts right now are, I think one word for it is eviction fatigue. we see a lot of private landlords who are just not necessarily renewing tenants who have Section 8 vouchers. I'll just focus on the subsidized portion because there's a whole other world of private landlord tenant. But we're seeing a lot of where they just are over it for whatever reason, and they just want to move on. And so then one of the challenges I think that adds to what Jane has said was, I'm sure she and Hakeem are also seeing the same thing, which is the difficulty in people finding Section 8 housing. You know, we hear all too often that I need to move, I want to move, you know, I don't like the condition of the property that the person is in. It's something that's not necessarily going to be addressed through a inspection with Section 8, or if it is, it sort of creates that dislike by the landlord of keeping the tenant there. And so one of the big barriers that we're seeing is I need to move, I can't find a place, or I can't afford to move, which gets into security deposit. We're hearing something about holding fees too, which we're not quite sure where that comes in, but we see some Section 8 voucher holders are being told to apply. They have to have a holding fee. The security deposit is always a challenge, but that notion of just lack of inventory, which I think Hakeem has got some strategies, and there's some state laws that are going to address that too. But those are what we could add to it. Emma, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'll turn it over to Hakeem to speak from the perspective of HPHA. Oh, I think you're still on mute.
And that's all I have to say. I would say that the issues are similar to what Jane and Dan have just stated. I will add a couple of things for the public housing. Is criminal activities is one of the biggest issues that results in evicting. And when we say criminal activities, not just the head of household, it could be the a youth that's living with them, a 14 or 15-year-old, causing criminal activities. We also drug use, misconduct, also denying management entry to install necessary equipment. All these are real life matters that result in evictions, or threats made against neighbors, staff, or security guards or others. The other that Jane has mentioned is failure to pay for the utilities. We give them utility allowance, and some folks they use it for whatever else they need to until the utilities are cut off, and then they kind of live just like in a tent kind of thing. And that will cause, if they don't cure such a thing, it does result in evictions. Unauthorized equipment and unauthorized guests could also lead to evictions if the person doesn't cure them. And we've seen a lot of things that escalate. For example, disagreement with neighbors that could escalate to bigger issues such as fight, and once a physical matter happens, and that will also result in evictions. And any kind of fraud, let it be giving us purposely the wrong information to have lower rent, or fraudulent activities against the neighbors or anything to them. So I'll stop at that. But mainly, you have to be really doing something wrong to be able to evict, because we all recognize, Seton County and all of us, that when we evict, it's a lot more work only to get somebody else to go through the same process. So we try to work with them, but there are things that are necessary to evict, specifically to making sure that there is an enjoyment of all the tenants and not just one person, and also making sure that the people follow any rules, laws, and regulations that exist on the basis of which they've been provided either the voucher or a unit in the public housing.
Thank you, Hakeem, and everyone for chiming in. I want to build on a couple of things that were brought up about how can advocates help tenants who find themselves in a situation where their housing may be at risk, and what are some of the easiest solutions that often get missed, and some of the issues that that you brought up are I think a bit complicated, but particularly with those that might have something to do with disability or language related issues. I also want to note that in the chat, Laura Thielen from PIC has noted that they're working on some resources for hoarding, because I know that this is an issue, whether it's Section 8 public housing or even just people renting in the private market, that may be an ongoing challenge. It could be a landlord-tenant issue. It could be an issue for the subsidy program or both. And so are there any solutions or strategies that you've seen that providers or tenants have been able to kind of work through some of these challenges where it might be related to a disability or communication issue? I'll start with Jane, and then maybe go to Dan next.
Thanks, Emma. To me, the biggest takeaway from the Section 8 program, and since I've been here, is if the landlords have someone to reach out to. And it's not, when a case manager is involved or when an agency is involved and the landlord knows that there's that agency or a case manager to turn to, whether it be 24/7, even if it's a voice to hear or call the police or, those kinds of support have been very advantageous to the landlord. And it's been a great selling point for disabled families to get into a unit. But the other thing too is probably, I want to suggest that if you are the case manager, maybe you could get to know them, the family in their living area. Go and see how they live, and not just, I don't mean to go every month or whatever, or maybe after they move in 2 months later, just to see how they're living, because for hoarders, you can see the progress. I mean, and so if there was a case manager that actually went in there from time to time and said, hey, I don't think it's a good idea to have this and this collecting or whatever it may be, there's a comforting, friendly face that they are comfortable with that can give them tips on how to be a good renter or how to stay within that, parameters of before you get into trouble. And I think I'd like to suggest that agencies involved with these disabled families or elderly families or just families in general, find out about the different parts of the unit and the different people involved. If you're in a property that has a resident manager and there's a security guard, and like say for example, public housing, Hakeem's public housing, if you know the security guard that's there, or the resident manager that's there, and you build a relationship, then it's half the battle is won, because you'll know who you can turn to, and they know who they can turn to also. So I just a lot of our families that are disabled have problems with the security guard or have problems with the resident manager, and if it could be where it builds a positive relationship, that'd be great, because then before it escalates, they'll be able to, dialogue with each other. Be the voice. And in all ways, we have to, I think it might be beneficial if we could educate some of them on budgeting. Because, when you don't pay your rent, and as Hakeem said, you give a utility allowance, but they don't pay the bill. Maybe there's a lack of education. I mean, we can tell them, here's the money that you pay less rent because we give you an allowance for utility, but it doesn't come as, and some families don't get the reimbursement. So, but even when they get the reimbursement, as Hakeem alluded to, they spend it on something else. So education, if you go back and see your family a couple of months later, hey, are you paying your utilities? Are you, trying to have them fix it before to them. bottomless pit. The networking agencies can network with each other so that everybody knows where I can get services. Maybe it all comes to, it's all about the money. Where are their services and available for little or zero types of, where the family doesn't have to pay for very much, or the family can go to some place and say, you know what, I had an emergency this month, a medical emergency. I need a little bit help. So those are the kinds of things that I think, again, to me, it's all about the money at some point.
Yeah, and before we transition to Dan, I'll note on some of the issues that you brought up, Jane, particularly on the tenancy skills or budgeting or even understanding what is required of you as the lessee. You have to open your own utility accounts, or is that included in rent? We do have a session coming up on that will touch on, I think, some of those topics. And so this 5-part series is kind of all related to try to build this, this package of how to help people stay housed or quickly transition back into housing. So I just wanted to note that because many of the things that are suggested are things that we may be able to connect with future providers who will be on this series. So I'll turn it over to Dan and then Hakeem.
Yeah, I would build on what some of the things that Jane was mentioning. The hoarding issue. As a law firm, we're going to try and advocate for that person who's a hoarder, but not advocate in the sense that we want them to continue to be a hoarder, because we recognize it's a challenge. It's a recognized mental health condition under some of the different coding. So some of it is just time. That might be where just getting them time to fix it up. We know that both inspection groups will sometimes do a series of inspections, like let's inspect the bedroom this week, let's inspect the kitchen next week, something that sort of gives a person a chance to do it, just that ability to time. And then one of the things that we are always looking for, and if this group had it, we'd love to know it, because is resources that help people who are hoarding to get rid of stuff. We've had some tenants who've had success with church groups. Some have been able to reach out to their healthcare providers or their caseworkers who are able to get people to come in and just sort of declutter and get rid of stuff. We reached out to one organization that actually charges to do it, but it was kind of spendy, and they tried to connect us with somebody who supposedly does it for gets grants or whatever, but we haven't heard back. So we'd all about if there's some agency, if there's some funding that would even pay to help that. We're not aware of it. We're looking for it. And then the last thing I'm going to build off of what Jane said, which is the budgeting part, which what's happened over the last couple of years, and maybe Jillian and maybe both Hakeem and Jane have seen this, is that people have gotten rental assistance. We've gotten rental assistance, and Jillian, I'm sure, is aware that people have gotten rental assistance just to pay their tenant pay portion, right? Not even their piece of the rent. We've had to have people get help to pay that, which is not a good situation for that tenant, and not a good sign. But feeding off of what Jane said, there's a seduction in not paying your rent, and we see this in a lot of different contexts where we have subsidized or private landlord tenant, or even people are being foreclosed on. And once you get used to the habit where you're not paying your rent and somebody else is paying it for you or not paying it for whatever reason, it's seductive that you just get used to it. And then when 6 months or a year happens and you aren't getting that assistance anymore, you don't know what to do. And we don't know what the trigger is that helps people get out of that, but it's you get used to it and you don't do what Jane said. You don't budget, you don't set aside $50 or $100 a month. We've had people who've gotten $30,000 of rental assistance, and they've tapped out on their rental assistance, and then they're ready to go, and they say, well, I don't have any money. It's like, well, you've had 18 months. Did you set aside $100 or $200 a month somehow to be ready for this? And literally, and this gets into what Emma, what you're talking about, people who just are living paycheck to paycheck, but there's that seduction that you don't have to pay it, and you just don't, and you don't plan for what's next. And that, we don't have an answer to that, but that's just, I appreciate Jane bringing it up, because that's a thing too. Thanks, Emma.
And I'll go to Hakeem before we transition into the next topic.
Okay, thank you. I think Jane and Dan summed it well. In addition to what Dan said, what we have seen is the folks who actually struggled and paid their rent, they feel that they were at a disadvantage because the neighbor didn't pay the rent and got all the money. So now, do I pay or don't I pay? So I think that's an issue. But if I have to summarize, to answer your question, what can the advocates and nonprofits do? I think one of the biggest thing is we have to always remember that just because a person moved into a public housing unit or Section 8 unit, that does not mean that the issues they had prior, they all disappeared. So if the person had a mental issues, they still have mental issues and they need a constant follow-up, because if they violate the rules and the lease and all of that, they're subject to evictions. If the person had issues with drugs or had issues with children that are troublemakers, if you want to call it that, that just doesn't disappear because next day they're in the house. And I think a lot of it will be good for us to always remember that whatever amount of follow-ups that happened prior to them being housed, a certain follow-up must continue until the service provider feel that now they can live independently, because those issues do come up and they're subject to evictions, as also not paying the rent will be subject to evictions. So some of the things I think is to continue to work with folks who have mental and drug use issues, even while they're still in the unit. So that will help. Explaining education, it's key. For example, the yearly inspection process, and to provide accurate information and change in the family's income. All those, I think the nonprofits will be able to help us by communicating that to the tenants. The cleanliness of the unit, we see a lot of issues with that. That's something that they may need assistance with, or they may need just to be taught how to. We've seen people who are using a granite top as a way to cut the meat with a big hammer, whatever they use, breaking it. So the certain things that they don't know, or even not using the tub and going outside the tub to shower the kids, causing water damage and things like that will result. So all of those things, they may be small, but they do add up. And these, what I'm mentioning, are real life things that we have seen. Continuing for alcoholism and drug abuse counseling, I think that's important to continue. Dan and Jane talked about budgeting and all of that. I think that's important. And one more thing is for the health providers to provide a quarterly or something, some kind of wellness checkup on the children there and on the parents and all of that, because that eventually contributes to them not going to work, not being able to pay for the rent or for the utilities, and also to provide the trained security to monitor the activities in the common areas. I think the biggest help will be how to maintain your unit, how from adhering to the lease, to paying on time, to being a good neighbor, to those things come with follow-up, a constant follow-up on building that relationship with the family, because we can't. We're there from 7:45 to 4:30. A lot of issues happen after that, and we're there to do a specific job. We're not staffed to be counselors to spend hours and hours with each family. We have over 40,000 tenants right now, so that kind of help, and it could be in one-to-one, and it could be us providing a venue that a nonprofit and others talk to multiple families at the same time, providing some classes and some training and some assistance with the children. That's another big issue that we've seen. A lot of parents in our housing are not able to control their kids and the youth because of they have friends and they end up doing some illegal things, and that will make the entire family subject to evictions. And I'll stop at that because of time.
Thank you, Hakeem. So to pivot a little bit, it's for households that they might, just not be able to afford their rent, whatever the circumstances may be. What can they do currently if they fall behind on rent and utilities? So I'm going to stop sharing this so that Jillian can get her slides up. And although this is centered around the Oahu Rent and Utility Relief Program, I think some of the same takeaways are applicable to the other neighbor islands for their programs as well.
Thank you, Emma. I hope you guys can see my screen because I can't see you guys.
We can see.
Jillian. Okay, thank you. Jillian Okamoto from Catholic Charities Hawaii. We are partnered with Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement to distribute the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. This program has been in effect, I believe, early 2021, so around April-ish. And so I'm going to be going over the program. It has changed slightly since the beginning, but do know that it still can change. There is actually another part which I'll go over at the end of my slides that we're still planning. So please make sure if whatever county you're in, you do go to that FAQ page to read up of the most current information. So general eligibility, households at or below 80% of the area median income. We are currently doing the fiscal year 2022 AMI chart, and I'll have a slide on what that looks like. The household has experienced financial hardship since March 2020, so basically during COVID. At least one person demonstrates a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability. So that's a past due utility or rent notice, eviction notice, unsafe or unhealthy living conditions, and other evidence of such risk as determined by each county. Here is the AMI chart for Oahu, so the city and county of Honolulu. It actually increased from 2021. So this is what we're using currently. So this is also used by CNHA as well. Eligible expenses for the RUP program, so rental and utility relief program, are rent and or utilities back to March 13, 2020. Prospective payments can be considered. However, you still need to qualify for the program and show future hardship and housing instability. The program does currently pay up to 18 months of payments. However, again, you still have to qualify, and as long as there's funding availability. Currently, we are having some folks maxing out. So again, I'll be going over another part of the program at the end of my slides. And to touch upon the Section 8 voucher holders, HPHA tenants, we can pay for a portion or for their portion of rent. We do encourage them to, making sure that they're reporting their changed income because, right, it's supposed to change as their income either decreases or increases. We do also cover utilities for these types of tenants as well. But we do make sure that we are not paying the utilities that are already covered by their allowances. So our staff are trained to ask if they recognize, there's a Section 8 voucher holder or an HPHA address, to ask if they already have that utility assistance allowance already in place. So as I was mentioning, we can do pretty much future payments, which is called a recertification. and it's in 3-month batches. And again, you are eligible as long as you still qualify for the program. So basically, if you're 81% AMI, you would no longer be eligible for the program. More than 80% of the applicants or renters do still qualify for recertifications. And if you're, seeking that recertification, please make sure that you are reaching out to your worker at CCH or CNHA. This is the webpage to go to should your, yourself, your clients, etc. Need assistance. It's the oneoahu.org/rent-help. It's one application per household. One lease is one household. Landlords and property managers can apply on behalf of the tenant or renter, but you need the renter's consent. So we do run into some issues where the landlord just applies and doesn't even talk to the renter. So to avoid that, please already have that consent already in place. And again, please go to the FAQs. This information may change. And then if you've already applied, please do not apply again. We spend a lot of time deduplicating a lot of folks. I think maybe about 20% of the people who apply this week will be a duplicate that we've already have in the system. So please do not apply again. We do have language assistance available, and we have several bilingual staff. However, bulk are interpreter services that we utilize, so it'll be over the phone, a 3-way call, and we do have some documents translated, but unfortunately it's not a whole lot. But we are working towards being or having a lot of language assistance available. Here are the other counties programs. So all counties got the ERA, so Emergency Rental Assistance funding for the federal government. They are all in various stages. We do also administer Maui County. So some things that can help an application, I guess, move a little quicker, and to also have expectations set in place. So please be patient. We are, we've already distributed funds to about 12,000 households between CCH and CNHA. So that's a lot of folks. We can't, it's not like a magic checkbox, you're approved. We do take time to, make sure your documents are in order. Sometimes folks, they're already sick of applying. So we do have people though to assist you with the application process. So do reach out for help. Accuracy of information, basically if we can't contact you, we can't contact you. So make sure that your name, address, email, and phone number are accurate. And then please double check your documents. We do a lot of back and forth, blurry, dark shadows in pictures, and sending the right document. We love pictures of your pets. However, it's not your, picture ID. So please make sure to submit correct documents. And then also consistently check your emails, missed calls, and voicemail. A lot of folks actually do not go into the spam or junk folders, but you need to know that both agencies use different platforms. So you may not get an email straight from, CNHA or CCH. It might be from our platform. CNHA uses Submittables and CCH uses Smartsheet. Please set up your voicemails, and also do not let them get full. Otherwise, again, we have no way to contact you. Now, going into the second, I guess, part of ERA 2, which is the second phase, the City and County of Honolulu, we're planning with them and CNHA the Housing Stability Services portion of the program. And basically, the goal is to help households transition to long-term supports to maintain their housing. And what that's going to consist of is case management, financial literacy, housing counseling, and information and referral. So again, it's in its infant stages right now, and we hope to have something in place hopefully in the next month. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jillian. I'll put my screen back up, but I do want to touch on one of the topics that you brought up, which is on, the recertifications for the rent and utility relief. And, I think any of our panelists could probably speak to this. There's been several stories, I think, in the news lately of the growing number of people who are close to or have maxed out their maximum time on the rent and utility relief program. And for some reason, their financial situation hasn't recovered or other things have happened beyond their ability to control. And they, might be finding themselves needing to look for another place to live. So can you speak to some of the things that, people who need to know if they're getting the ongoing rental assistance, especially those that have been maybe getting it for some time? You touched on a bit in your presentation, but I wanted to ask if you wanted to add anything, and then maybe Dan, if you wanted to add anything as well.
So it is really tough to transition somebody off of, like Dan was saying earlier, people have gotten their rents paid for over a year now. And then, all of a sudden having to pay, they forgot how. So that is something that our staff for the housing stability services are going to have to combat and be trained on. But right now, all, like both sides, CNHA, CCH, and even the city, when they take calls, this program is not forever. And people were struggling before, so we want to tap into their resiliency, their strengths, their families, their friends, and remind them that, they have those resources to turn to. And if not, then we will be there to help guide them to other resources. So, like there's the other programs that popped up, and don't forget about the pre-COVID-19 programs. So within internally, I think Danny presented last week, we have our housing placement program and state, homeless emergency grants program. So anytime that we find that they might be eligible for something else, we will help and steer them towards that other program. Just because, again, this RUP program and the Mirror program, the Kauai program, the Hawaii Island program, they are not forever. They will end. And 18 months seems like a lot, but if you look at it today, we are already past 18 months, right, from when we can assist. So it is tough, but we are going to have all of our staff trained to combat the, what did you call it, Dan? The seduction of not paying rent.
Exactly, Jillian. What this question is, so as a law firm, part of what we try and tell tenants, and it sometimes is telling the landlord at the same time, is just that is the truth, and that once somebody's in the position where they're not able to pay their rent, either through their own means or through the rental assistance, the hard reality is there's going to be a definite end date. And what we try and let people know is that you have to be aware that it will come to an end, and that there will not be able to be further assistance. During the course of the pandemic, people were able to get, oftentimes it was measured in months and maybe even longer. It could have been measured in, almost a year, where somebody was able to maintain their housing, or longer with, the 18 months. But now, as we're getting closer to the end of, what Act 57, which is the other extended notice for non-payment, the reality is becoming that it's the time that you can get somebody staying in a house, staying in their home, is shortened. And so that's where right now we're trying to extend it as much as possible, but just that reality of tenants that they will have to move, and the resources we're providing are probably some of the groups that are on here. Like, we do refer people to Catholic Charities for rental or for security deposit assistance, or call 211. And we're also referring people to the PIC for the different types of assistance that aren't just rental assistance, but some of the more diversion for homeless programs. But there is not a, the main way to be ready is unfortunately, it's a truism. It's to start to be ready, start to plan for it, and that's the hard part, to get people over that hump to start to really plan on what they're going to do next, which isn't really necessarily a good answer, but that's why I got Emma.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into the theme for future sessions. We do have sessions coming up on, how to look for a rental unit, employment programs that are out there that can help support people who are looking to get back into the workforce, change careers, or get trained in something to seek higher employment. And then another session on budgeting and tenancy skills. So, all of these things that kind of factor into helping households regain financial stability. I want to ask quickly if there are any questions from participants. I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, I see a hand. Kara, if you can unmute, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Emma. 18 months is your rental and utility, your RURP, how do you pronounce that? RURP program. So is this 100% of that person's rent, or is this a portion of that person's rent? I just want to get it clarified just from my notes, because I work with the homeless already. So we're always looking at that 30% of the income. So under this program through Catholic Charities, are you providing full rental assistance for 18 months?
So if it is a Section 8 voucher holder or any other type of voucher holder or a HPHA tenant, we only pay the portion that they owe. And to go even further, if they've already paid a portion of their portion, we would pay the remaining balance still owed. So for anybody who has subsidized rent, it is not the full entire rent. It is whatever that they owe.
Okay, thank you so much.
There any other questions? I don't see any other hands. And so what I wanted to do just quickly, I want to ask our panelists if they have anything they want to add. I know HPHA has some things that they wanted to share. Does anyone else have any last comments before I turn it over to Hakeem? Okay.
Yeah, Emma, I had one thing to add is that, if people are struggling, legal aid through the course of the pandemic, we've become extraordinarily proficient at whatever legal means can be accomplished to help somebody maintain their housing. So if somebody thinks they have a basis for maintaining their housing that probably transcends the fact they aren't paying, they should certainly reach out to legal aid. And one thing I wanted to add to this group, because as time goes by, it's going to become more relevant. There was one piece of legislation that was really, that HPHA was instrumental in it, that Hakeem will probably address, but there was another piece of legislation that passed that is relevant, will become relevant, which is the state has passed legislation that to address the issue where people advertise no Section 8. That's been a very common refrain that we hear from our Section 8 voucher holders, is that they get into Craigslist or whatever use they have, and they see something that says no Section 8. So it doesn't go into effect fully until next year, but the state has said that you can't no longer discriminate against people based on the fact that they have a Section 8 voucher, based on their source of income. So as time progresses, that's something that the people on this group should be aware of, and that those are the types of people who can reach out to, certainly legal aid is one source, but they can reach out to others and to sort of inform them if they're struggling with those barriers as that legislation comes in. I wanted to add that, and I know Hakeem has some good things that have happened from his efforts too.
Thank you. I think if I have to leave a final advice, will be for all of us to communicate to the tenants to take this very, very seriously, because we will have no choice but to evict if they don't pay the rent. And I like to always remind those who already have Section 8 voucher or have a public housing that it's very hard to come by. That if you are evicted, it's going to take years for you to come back again because it's just there's a wait list and people wait years to get in. And also to remind them that they are in better shape than those who have to pay 100% of the rent, because you pay 30% of the rent, and just like before the pandemic, if you lose your job and you make in zero, well, you pay zero rent. So there is no reason really why to get in the misunderstanding that the government's going to come and help you again to pay the rent. I think those funds were available at certain times, all the stars lined up. I'm not sure if that's going to come back, and we all have responsibility once we sign that lease agreement or Section 8 voucher agreement that we have to pay that portion. So everybody needs to take it personally, and it adds up. As of March 31st or April 1st, 450 families in our public housing, totaling about $1.1 million, haven't paid their bills. And they still have their jobs. So it's not lack of losing fund, but I think Dan hit it right on in the beginning. It's just that maybe if I wait, another program will pop in and I'll be able to get the money and pay it, and then it adds up and 3 months later, 4 months later, it said, oh my God, I can't pay all of this because they have spent that money. So the advice will be for folks to really do that. And for Section 8, at least, we are able to help. There is a lot of the bills that Dan have mentioned that pass. I think that will be very helpful. We also got an appropriation of $1.5 million and to inspectors to be able to expedite the process and house as many people as we can in the least amount of time. But also, we're very grateful. There was one move to work designation that was available in the country that we applied for and we did get, and that gives us certain flexibilities that we're working on. How can we be a little bit more flexible, and how can we provide different programs to make it easier for the tenants as well as for the landlords, including providing certain reimbursement and certain contract rents to be able to give us the unit for our Section 8 holders, sign-in bonuses and others. All those are coming up sometime soon. We're in the process of working on the MTW plan that we will submit into HUD. But in general, we are here. We really hate to evict. We're not here to evict. We're here to house. Our numbers show that is in the 2-digit, our evictions, and during COVID, I think we only evicted like 3, and for criminal activities and all of that. But we have the fiduciary obligation to make sure that the program is intact, and part of that is we have to collect that 30% to let our public housing managers know. We have done payment plans in the past to make it easier for the tenants. We'll continue to do that, but at a certain time, if the tenants don't live up to their obligation or they refuse to take advantage of all what is available out there, let it be through us or through Catholic Charities or Dan or anybody else, then at that time we'll have no choice but to take the next step. So somebody else that's been in the wait list for years can have an opportunity to take advantage of government programs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hakeem. So we heard, a wide range of perspectives today. I want to thank all of our panelists, for really being candid about some of the issues that you're seeing and the realities that are impacting tenants. And, for those on this call who are working with people who are participating in these programs, or even if they're not, I think all of the information is very helpful. Want to come back to a few key themes that I think have come up as we've had these planning discussions of, things that we can kind of all keep in mind. The first being the early identification of problems and early intervention, whether it applies to, applying for rental assistance or noticing that somebody might be struggling with accumulating items or possibly failing an inspection or having a landlord-tenant issue because of that. Of course, the sooner that there's a problem, the sooner it can be addressed, and possibly the more resources that are available and the more time that's available to approach it with the person. The second theme that came up, was communication, and whether it's having a crisis that's exacerbated by a lack of clear communication, whether it's due to embarrassment or fear, or even language or cultural barriers. And then also when, people do get into a housing program that doesn't have case management with it, how do we ensure that people have a, warm handoff to someone that can kind of check on them? And I know that's something that many of you on this call have also identified if people are transitioning to a program that isn't really going to come with social services. And then finally, connecting to proper resources so that, anyone who's having an issue gets connected to the resources that, that can help to address whatever the situation is. And I think it's especially important, as Dan mentioned, if someone is being evicted or thinks they're at risk of eviction, thinks that they may have a way to, to mitigate that situation, that they get the proper legal advice from an agency, like legal aid or the state landlord tenant hotline, so that they know what their options are, before the situation, continues. And so, with that, I just want to remind everybody that we have 3 more future sessions on the next 3 Wednesdays at the same time. I want to ask if PIC wants to add anything about these sessions. And I think we've also posted the recording of session number 1 for those who want to do a recap or if you've missed that session.
Sure, thanks, Emma. I just put into the chat the infographic for next week's session, the guide to finding the best rental unit for you, as well as the Teams meeting link. That'll be going out with the Partners in Care Weekly Digest. So if you don't receive that and would like to, please email Elliot. It's elliottw@partnersInCareOahu.org, or you could reach out to myself or Emma and we'll connect you so that you get added to that listserv. And I also wanted to just show, I'll put in the chat as well, where you can go for the recording from our first session. We are still waiting to come out with a 1-pager on this. Thanks, Elliot. A 1-pager on the session that we had last Wednesday, but the recording is already up. It's on the Partners in Care website. I put it in the chat. You can also just go to partnersincareoahu.org, go to the About Provider Resources, and it's right there. The YouTube video. So feel free to recap from last week, and then we'll be posting that 1-pager soon, hopefully in the next week or next couple of days.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to all our panelists, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care.